Hello, everyone. My name is Yannicka Olson, and I am a part of the Skoll Foundation team. I'm excited to welcome you to this Skoll World Forum session, Criminalization of Poverty, Stories of Injustice. This year, the forum's theme is Closing the Distance. We thought there was no better way to reflect that theme than to invite our global network to design and build a new kind of event together. I want to share a few quick notes before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be released publicly after the event. Feel free to use the chat to engage with each other and ask questions of the speakers. But please note that this session is being translated live, so please pause after any questions or answers to allow room for that translation. This session is scheduled to end in 90 minutes. After the session, please take a few seconds to complete the single question feedback survey and a poll that we'll post here at the end of the session. On social media, we're using the hashtag SkollWF and would love for you to do the same. But we are so thrilled to be able to include this session in this year's virtual Skoll World Forum. And I want to extend a special thank you to International Bridges to Justice for proposing and designing it. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my amazing colleague, Jimmy Briggs.
Back at you, Yannicka. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, everyone joining us today, and thank you especially to my colleagues, my sisters and brothers, whom you'll hear from shortly in this conversation. Today, we're going to be speaking to the theme, Criminalization of Race and Poverty. And as Yannicka noted, this session was designed, conceived of by our past school awardee, the National Bridges to Justice, led by Chen. Before I introduce the speakers, whom you'll hear from shortly, I first want to make some remarks and ask for a moment of silence. In the past weeks here in the United States, we've seen the deaths of an African-American young man named Dwayne Wright. In the past months and past year, we've seen escalating violence against our Asian American, Pacific Islander sisters and brothers against the backdrop of COVID-19. Around the world, including in the countries you'll hear from being discussed shortly, we've seen too many instances of torture, abuse, persecution, unlawful detention. I ask that we all take a moment of silence in honor of those whose lives have been lost but not forgotten, in honor of those who are in detention, who are survivors of abuse and torture, and in honor of those defenders, those warriors who speak on behalf for and work with these individuals. Thank you. I also want to note that I am joining you from here in the United States on land originally belonging to the Lenape indigenous community, now known as New York City. Now I'll introduce our speakers. First, Chen, founder and CEO of International Bridges to Justice. Mia Yamamoto, defense attorney and civil rights, as well as LGBTQI+ activist. Jean-Claude Varakamfitiye, country manager of Burundi and Bridges to Justice. By video, we'll be hearing from Ilham Said, an IBJ defense lawyer in Syria. Ilham will be represented live by Mohammed Bakri, program manager for IBJ Syria. You'll also see a video from Dawen Nandar Hutkong, senior lawyer, IBJ Myanmar, who will be represented live by Chi Totar Su, program manager for IBJ Myanmar. You'll hear from Tafazwe Christmas, who's a lawyer with the IBJ Zimbabwe Trust, as well as Nadine Amuli Feza, lawyer for DRC Bridges to Justice. Our translator is Linda Johnson. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce you to Karen Che, who will be making opening remarks for this session.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. And thank you, the Skoll Foundation. Thank you, Yannicka. I would like to actually begin by sharing a poem that's often shared amongst us as defenders at International Bridges to Justice when we come together. In the past, we've had the pleasure of being together to feel the strength of our community. And today it's really a larger pleasure to be able to be joined and strengthened by this larger community on the Zoom community. And it's by Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The road is often long, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. But deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. So as defenders, we've come together, and today we've all been talking about how exciting this is that we get to come together ourselves, because when we tell our stories, we sometimes feel that challenge of doing criminal defense in an area that is not always supported by the world, and yet we feel the strength of each other, and today we feel really the strength of you. So my name is Chen, and I'm a Skoll awardee and founded International Bridges to Justice. I'm a former public defender from San Francisco, and there began to see very clearly, even back 25 years ago when I was a public defender starting in San Francisco, the criminalization of race and poverty. I moved to Cambodia and lived in Cambodia from 1994 to 97. I often tell the beginning story of walking into a prison and seeing a 12-year-old boy who was tortured and denied access to counsel for stealing a bicycle. And that really being the genesis of seeing that this was also true in Cambodia, the criminalization of race and poverty and everything else. And then in the year 2000, founded International Bridges to Justice. And as you will soon hear from all of my colleagues, this is really a worldwide issue. Unfortunately, in many countries throughout the world, although the laws say that you have a right to a lawyer and right not to be tortured, this is something which is often only reserved for people with resources. And so for the majority of the world, if you are picked up by the police and you don't have the resources for a lawyer, you're often tortured, because torture is the cheapest form of investigation. And if you continue not to have resources, which you often will not, you may be locked in prison for a very long time and essentially invisible. One of the things that is been the most encouraging for us is that our defenders throughout the world have really stood up and gone into the prisons and brought light into the darkest corners of the prisons and said, we'll make the invisible visible. And this is an issue not only for the people in prison, but also for the worldwide defender community, which is one of the reasons why we're so excited to be here. The model of International Bridges to Justice globally is to, number one, have advise on a rights campaign so that people within countries know what their rights are. And number two, to do trainings for the defenders. Three, to do roundtable discussions with judges, prosecutors, police. And then ultimately also to set up defender resource centers so that defenders can really defend. I know that this session is also about stories from the field, stories of justice or injustice. And one thing I just wanted to highlight before you hear from our defenders is that there are stories that you might not hear, which aren't just about the people in the field, but really their own stories of just incredible courage. And I was trying to think of a way to describe it because they themselves are in so much danger so often and yet continue to do the work. And I was reminded of a time a couple years ago when we were in Burundi. And I remember we were at a dinner with the defenders. And at a certain point, I said, hey, we should probably all get going because there's a curfew and it's super dangerous. And I remember, see JC smiling because he remembers this too. And he said, okay. And then they looked at each other and they looked at me and they said, but you know what? One more story, because it's the stories that we share together and the stories of strength and courage that allow us to continue the work together. So I'm really excited that you'll hear stories from the field, but I also just wanted to overlay it with what you might not hear is really the stories of the tremendous courage of these defenders who just keep going. And I'm just really bow down to you for all that you do. And I'm really excited that we can share our stories today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words, Karen. And, you know, in preparing for this conversation with you, your colleagues Sanji and Andrew, I've just learned so much about not only the work of the IBJ, but also just the critical importance that these women and men undertake every day. To your point, often of the cloak of invisibility. And just so great, again, thank you for bringing this session to the forum. First, we'll hear from Jean-Claude talking about the work he's undertaken in Burundi, and then he and I will have a short exchange before moving on to our next colleague. Jean-Claude?
Thank you so much, Jimmy, for giving me the floor. Hello, everyone. My name is Jean-Claude Varakamfiti, as introduced. I am a defense lawyer from Burundi. I am also the Burundi Bridge to Justice country manager, and I'm joining you from Bujumbura, the economic capital of Burundi. Our country has suffered a series of internal wars and political crises that took lives of nearly 1 million of people. On survivor's side, conflict had, among other consequences, deepened the level of poverty and created a lot of vulnerabilities. According to the World Bank study of 2017, around 70% of Burundi were poor and 40% were extremely poor. Today, things are getting worse because of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. Such facts affect enjoyment of rights, such as the right to a fair justice, the right to be humanly detained, and the right to a counsel. Majority of Burundians are unable to afford a lawyer because they are poor. Our prisons are over capacity at more than 300%. We do not have formal government-sponsored legal aid, and due to that, thousands of detainees will languish in prison for months and years due to lack of proper follow-up of their cases. Imagine a father or a mother of a family who can spend 3 years in prison without facing a judge, and who, at the end, is declared innocent. Remember, please, that most of time, his children and the entire family are relying on his support to meet their basic need. Visualize with me what happened to this family of a mother or a father who is in prison, locked there for years. The family is simply broken, torn apart, and children abandon schools and become homeless. This happened in a northern province in Burundi, where we met a father of 5 little children who spent more than 3 years in prison before being judged. And finally, he was declared innocent. This is why BBJ has taken the lead to provide every child, woman, and man with early access to a counsel on a pro bono basis. We built a strong community of pro bono defenders who are providing hope to ordinary citizens And we have created a network of women lawyers who are providing legal assistance to female in detention. And it is in this way that one of the female lawyers has provided legal assistance to a pregnant woman who has been taken in detention 3 months before delivery. She was doubly affected by her detention. Not only she was detained before for a crime that she has not committed, but also she was deeply affected on the idea of giving birth to her firstborn in prison, where there is no minimum medical system to welcome a baby. Thanks to our women lawyers network, this woman was released a month before delivery, and the child was finally born outside the prison. Indeed, when a criminal case is badly prosecuted, it will receive a biased outcome. This explains why BBJ stand at the front line to build the capacity of criminal justice actors from the bottom to the top level. And so far, hundreds of judicial police officers, prosecutors, and judges have undergone BBJ human rights training. Please note that when IBJ first arrived in Burundi in 2006, there was only 70 lawyers working in the entire country, and there was no form of systematic legal aid for its approximately 9 million of people, and a very small number of lawyers were ready to provide pro bono legal assistance. A decade after IBJ started working here in Burundi, the number of lawyers affiliated with the Burundi Bar Association multiplied by 10. And in the meantime, another bar association was created. And the culture of pro bono is being consolidated. In 2018, 10 lawyers after IBJ first began its work in Burundi, the first national legal aid strategy was adopted. BBJ's tangible impact is now located here in Bujumbura and in the neighborhood. It needs to be spread in provinces. We are working to scale up our model nationwide through different resources centers. We plan to establish in center, the north and the south of the country. And as cooperation is the key, the criminal, BBJ concluded MOUs with both government and non-government stakeholders. So criminalization of poverty, in our opinion, must stop because justice can't wait. And thank you so much for your attention.
That was wonderful, Jean-Claude. Thank you, brother, for those remarks and insight into the situation in Burundi. I just had one or two questions to ask you, Jean-Claude.
Yes, please.
First, you spoke about the number of lawyers in your country prior to IBJ support. I'm curious, the number of lawyers that you noted have increased dramatically. Was the idea of pro bono legal support a new phenomenon or a new thing in Burundi? And how was that received, the idea of pro bono or free support to defendants?
When IBJ started the work in Burundi, as I mentioned, we have a very few number of lawyers, and the culture of pro bono was not inexistent. It was even a tough task for IBJ to convince both the Bar Association and lawyers to adhere to this culture. IBJ has played a significant role to build this model, and lawyers has attended a lot of our events, including roundtables, after which they have been facing that the reality on the ground, that there is this need to provide pro bono legal assistance to the poor ordinary citizens. And they were taking for their own this commitment to offer their time, to offer their resources, and to provide this important assistance to ordinary citizens. Yes, IBJ has played a significant role to establish this culture and consolidating it through several events so far conducted.
Thank you so much, Jean-Claude. One more question. I'm curious, how were you drawn? How were you called to doing the work, becoming a lawyer? What attracted you or inspired you to become a lawyer, a legal defender in Burundi?
First of all, there is this empathy, bringing a lawyer to feel this empathy, to feel their own that there is this need. And in addition, there is this trying to work with both authorities, state and non-state, the Bar Association leaders, to help us, because this is quite strategic to find out the support from everywhere. And in the meantime, the movement, the voices are coming from many actors, it will be therefore understood. And yes, to briefly, this is trying to bring this empathy and have lawyer understand what make this their goal, make it their own goal, not a goal which is possessed only by BBJ, but bring them to adhere to this goal. This is mostly the strategy that we have been adopting.
Jean-Claude, thank you so very much for your insight, for your perspective and explanation of the progressive work that's happening in Burundi. I'm looking forward to having you part of our later conversation. Next, we'll be seeing a video and hearing from a colleague in Syria, Ilham Said, and then we'll go to reflections from her counterpart, Mohammed Bakri. Thank you.
مرحبا جميعا، أنا إلهام سعيد، محامية منذ 13 عاما وناشطة حقوقية. منذ اندلاع الثورة السورية كنت مع زملائي المحامين الأحرار من المدافعين عن المتظاهرين الذين كان نظام الأسد يعتقلهم بسبب تظاهرهم السلمي للمطالبة بالحرية والعدالة والكرامة. نزحت إلى ريف إدلب الشمالي بعد أن قام النظام بقصف الحي الذي كنت أقيم فيه بحلب، وأشغل حالياً موقع عضو نقابة المحامين الأحرار في الجمهورية العربية السورية، وأعمل ضمن فريق المساعدة القانونية IBJ في مناطق الشمال السوري المحرر. عملي هذا لا يساعد الأفراد فقط، بل يساعد أيضاً في تطوير النظام القانوني ككل في في الحقيقة أن أساعد الفقراء والمستضعفين من النساء والأطفال في المجتمع بمنحهم الحماية القانونية حتى لا يتعرضوا للإساءة. وأريد أن أحدث فرقاً كمحامية، سيما وأن دور المحاميات السوريات قد تراجع خلال السنوات الأخيرة بسبب الأوضاع الأمنية المتردية في عموم سوريا. وسأسرد لكم الآن أهمية عملي في فريق IBJ بتقديم المساعدة القانونية للفئات المستضعفة. ففي شهر يناير من هذا العام مثلت طفلاً يبلغ من العمر 14 عاماً فقط، تم اعتقاله من قبل الشرطة وإحالته إلى محكمة الأحداث الجانحين بتهمة السرقة. وقد سألت الطفل أثناء لقائي به كمحامي الدفاع عنه عن سبب قيامه بهذا الفعل، سيما أن ما قام بسرقته ضئيلا نوعا ما. فأجاب أنه أراد أن يطعم إخوته الصغار، فقام بسرقة مبلغ مالي بسيط من سيارة مركونة في أحد الشوارع القريبة من منزله، ثم قام بشراء طعام وبعض البسكويت لإخوته الصغار. وبسؤالي له عن سبب عدم قيام والده بالعمل وتأمين حاجيات إخوته، انفجر فجأة بالبكاء وهو يردد: إن الطائرات قتلت أبي بقصف على منزلنا في مدينة حلب قبل أن يتم تهجير من تبقى على قيد الحياة إلى الريف الشمالي من حلب. لقد أثرت هذه القضية في وجداني وعاطفتي، وجعلتني أبذل جهدا مضاعفا لإقناع القاضي بأن هذا الطفل غير مذنب، بل المذنب هو من قتل والده وتركه دون معين. وواجب مجتمعنا الوقوف إلى جانب هذه الحالات بدلا من التعاطي معهم كمذنبين. وأصبحت أكثر صلابة وأصرار على مساعدة هذا الطفل الذي سرقت الحرب منه أغلى ما يملك، وهو كنف الأب وحنانه. وطلبت من الطفل أن يروي قصته أمام القاضي تماما كما رواها لي. وفي موعد الجلسة المحدد طلبت من القاضي أن يستمع بعناية لحروف هذا الطفل وهو يسرد الأسباب التي دفعته للقيام بهذا الفعل. وأثناء سرد الطفل لقصته أمام القاضي شعرت أن القاضي أبدى اهتماما لأقوال الطفل، ولمست تعاطفا ملحوظا من المحكمة تجاهه. وفي نهاية الدعوة كان حكم القاضي رحيما جدا بالطفل، وأطلق سراحه بعد أن أخذ بكل الأسباب القانونية المخففة. من القصة التي سردتها على مسامعكم سيداتي وسادتي يتبين لكم أهمية عملي في فريق IBJ في سوريا وحبي وتعلقي بهذا العمل. فقد دربتنا IBJ تدريبا ممتازا جعلني أزداد ثقة بنفسي وأكثر شغفا بتقديم المساعدة والحماية القانونية للفئات المستضعفة في بلدي الذي يعاني من الحرب منذ أكثر من 10 سنوات. وقضيتنا في الأساس تتمحور حول حماية العدالة والعدالة فقط.
Wow. Powerful words, powerful insight. Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us and amplifying, giving clarification to Ilham's remarks. One question, having spent time in conflict areas, I'm kind of amazed, to be honest with you, Mohammed, that IBJ has been able to continue existing, to have impact throughout the conflict. And I'm curious, from your perspective, especially having just heard from Ilham, what are the, I guess, the guidelines or the processes IBJ undertakes to protect its team in a situation as we've seen in Syria in recent years?
Thank you, Jimmy, and hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our stories. In terms of protecting our lawyers, first and foremost, we conduct a risk assessment, which is the most important thing to start with, so that we assess the risks and we deal with these risks accordingly. So by either mitigating these risks, eliminating those risks, or if not possible, by trying to work around these risks. So for example, transportation is a huge risk for our lawyers in Syria. So what we try to do is ask them to connect virtually as much as possible. One more thing we try to do in this regard is that we created a groundbreaking mobile app, which is available on Google Play. It's called the Justice Hub Syria, that connects lawyers with each other, allows them to socialize, exchange knowledge, and discuss cases. And this app also allows lawyers to get in touch with clients. So any member of the public seeking legal knowledge, be that a consultation request or a request for representation before a court of law, they can get in touch with a lawyer by downloading and installing this app.
That's remarkable, Mohammed. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, again, given the context in which you and your colleagues, such as Ilham, have been working, how has, I imagine, access to certain parts of the country have been limited, or maybe IBJ has still been able to maintain pretty good access throughout all regions of the country despite the fighting?
That's an excellent question. Honestly, we work in the northwestern region of Syria for many reasons. First of all, the justice system is functioning enough so that we can work in the sense that there are lawyers who can do their jobs. Whereas in other parts of Syria, there are different legal systems other than the national system, and lawyers cannot work. So even before the war started in 2011, lawyers weren't able to actually defend their clients, let alone public defenders. And the defense consists only of one court session where the lawyer would speak to the court or the judge and say, I ask you to have mercy upon my client. And that's it. And the second reason we work in the Northwest is because of access. I myself reside in a border city with Syria in southern Turkey. And to have access to the northwest of Syria, I'm residing here, and so that we can have access to our lawyers. In fact, in 2019, we held a training in Gaziantep where we invited 22 Syrian lawyers from Aleppo and invited them into Gaziantep for a 4-day training.
Aside from the obvious risk associated with being in a conflict area, Mohammed, what are the other threats to the success and impact of your work in Syria?
Well, aside from the ongoing war and bombardment, there is always the risk of threats that our lawyers receive. Sometimes there is a risk of VBIEDs or IEDs, and we've seen that some of the lawyers that we work with have lost their loved ones as a result of IEDs and constant bombings. One of the lawyers that we didn't, have the chance to work with because we started our program in late 2017, actually died from a VBIED while going to his work. So it just speaks to the plethora of dangers that lawyers are subject to in Syria in general and Northwest Syria in particular.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I'm so looking forward to more of your candid observations in our later group conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll be seeing a video with remarks from an IBJ colleague based in Myanmar, Da Wen.
Hello, မင်္ဂလာပါရှင်။ကျွန်တော်အနေနဲ့ကျမကိုကျမအရင်ဆုံးမိတ်ဆက်ပေးချင်ပါတယ်။ကျမမိကတော့ဒေါ်ဝင်းနန္ဒာဖြစ်ပြီးတော့မှမန်လေးမြို့မှာနေထိုင်ပါတယ်။ကျမတရားလွှတ်တော်ရှေ့နေတူဖြစ်ပြီးတော့IBJ မြန်မာမန်လေးတရားမျှတမှုစင်တာမှာအကြီးအကဲရှေ့နေဖြစ်နေလုပ်ကိုင်ရရှိပါတယ်။ကျမက2008ခုနှစ်မှာမန်လေးရနာဘုံတက္ကသိုလ်ကနေပြီးတော့ဥပဒေဘွဲကိုရရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်။ကျမကဥပဒေဘွဲရရှိပြီးတဲ့နောက်မှာကျမရဲ့အသက်မွေးဝမ်းကြောင်းမှုကိုတော့ရှေ့နေတူဖြစ်နေပဲစတင်ခဲ့ပါတယ်ရှင်။ ကျမရဲ့ရှင်းနေဖြစ်နေစတင်ခဲ့တဲ့အချိန်မှာတော့ကျမကမြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာဒီ CNM မှာပြည်ဝင်ချင်းတက်နိုင်တဲ့သူတွေထိခိုက်လွယ်တဲ့သူတွေအတွက်ဥပဒေထောက်ကူပေးတဲ့ရှင်းနေကတရဖြစ်ခြင်းခဲ့ပါတယ်2016ခုနှစ်မှာတော့ကျမဒီတရားလွှတ်တော်ရှင်းနေဖြစ်လာခဲ့ပါတယ်ရှင်ကျမရဲ့ရှင်းနေဖြစ်တမှုရဲ့အကြောင်းမှု9နှစ်ကျော်ပြီးတဲ့နောက်မှာတော့ကျမ IBG မြန်မာကို2018ခုနှစ်မှာစတင်ပြီးတော့လုပ်ကိုင်ခဲ့ပါတယ်IBG မြန်မာဟာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာတရားမျှတမှုစံနှုန်း5ခုကိုဖွင့်လှစ်ပြီးတော့မှဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုလုပ်ငန်းတွေပြုလုပ်လျက်ရှိပါတယ်ဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုလုပ်ငန်းတွေမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ပြည်မှုဖြစ်ဆွဆွဲခံရတဲ့သူတွေမြစ်တိဘာသာကိုကုကွယ်သူမဆိုမြစ်တိလေငွေတီသားရှိကိုသူမဆိုနေဒီမတန်ဆွမ်းသူတွေဟာဥပဒေရမိမိတို့ရတဲ့ရထိုက်တဲ့အခွင့်အရေးတွေကိုကာကွယ်နိုင်ရန်အတွက်ကျမတို့တွေကဥပဒေထောက်ကူပေးခြင်းပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်ကျမ IBG မှာစတင်လုပ်ကိုင်နေတဲ့အချိန်ကနေပြီးတော့မှယနေ့အချိန်ဒီမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကလေးတငယ်တွေအမျိုးသမီးတွေလူနည်းစုတွေအတွက်ကိုမှခမဲ့ဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုပေးလျက်ရှိပါတယ်ကျမတို့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာဒီ2021ခုနှစ်ဖေဖော်ဝါရီလ1ရက်နေ့မှာစစ်တပ်ကနေအာဏာထိန်းပြီးတဲ့နောက်မှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တော့မြန်မာပြည်သူတွေဟာမိမိတို့ရဲ့ဆန္ဒတွေကိုငြင်းချမ်းစွာဖြင့်ထုတ်ဖော်ပြသခဲ့ကြပါတယ်တစ်ချက်တင်ပါပဲကျမတို့တွေရဲ့ဒီဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုရှေ့နေတွေရဲ့အခန်းကဏ္ဍဟာအရေးပါလာပြီးတော့ဒီအခုရလူထုဟာတရားမျှတမှုလက်လန်းမီရရှိရေးအတွက်ကလည်းပဲအရေးကြီးလာခဲ့ပါတယ်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာဒီပထမဦးဆုံးဆန္ဒထုတ်ဖော်မှုတွေပြုလုပ်ခဲ့တာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဖေဖော်ဝါရီလ4ရက်နေ့မှာမန္တလေးကနေပြီးတော့စတင်ခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျောင်းသားသမဂ္ဂမှာကျောင်းသားဟောင်းတွေတက်ကြွလှုပ်ရှားသူ၄ဦးတို့ကိုလည်းပဲရေးတပ်ဖွဲ့ရနေပြီးတော့မှဖမ်းဆီးခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီ၄ဦးနဲ့ကနေပြီးတော့တဦးအတွက်ကိုလည်းပဲကျမအနေဖြင့်ကိုစားပြုပြီးတော့မှလိုက်ပါဆောင်ရွက်ပေးလျက်ရှိပါတယ်9ရက်ခန့်ကြာပြီးတဲ့နောက်မှာတော့ဖေဖော်ဝါရီလ9ရက်နေ့မှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်မန်လေးမြို့မှာဒီလူကြီး300ကျော်ပါဆိုလို့ရှိရင်မန်လေး38လမ်း9388လမ်းမှာငင်းချက်စွာဖြင့်စီတန်းလှည့်လည်ပြီးတော့မှဆန္ဒပြခဲ့ကြပါတယ်အဲဒါကိုရဲတပ်ဖွဲ့ဝင်တွေကနေပြီးတော့မှအင်အားသုံးပြီးတော့မှအကြမ်းဖက်ကဖြိုခွင်းမှုတွေလည်းပဲရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီကနေပြီးတော့မှ80နဲ့တဦးကိုရဲတပ်ဖွဲ့နေရဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ရိုက်တက်ပြီးတော့မှဖမ်းဆီးခဲ့တာရှိပါတယ်ကျမတို့တရားမျှတမှုစင်တာကနေပြီးတော့မှဒီဖမ်းဆီးခံရသူ12ဦးရဲ့သတင်းချက်လက်တွေကိုရရှိခဲ့ပါတယ်ကျမနဲ့ကျမရဲ့အဖွဲ့ရဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့မန္တလေးမှာရှိတဲ့ဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုလုပ်ငန်းတွေကိုလုပ်ကိုင်ပေးနေတဲ့အဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေpro bono ရှိနေတွေပြီးတော့အလွတ်တန်းဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုပေးနေတဲ့ရှိနေဆရာမတွေနဲ့ချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးတော့မှကျမတို့တွေညှိနှိုင်းကလှုပ်ဆောင်ခဲ့ကြပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီနောက်မှာတော့ကျမတို့တွေအားလုံးကဒီဖန်ဆီးခံရတဲ့ထဲကနေပြီးတော့မှကျန်ရှိနေတဲ့80ဦးရဲ့သတင်းချက်လက်တွေကိုလည်းပဲဖော်ထုတ်နိုင်ခဲ့ပါတယ်ရှင်အဲ့တော့ဖေဖော်ဝါရီလ10ရက်နေ့မှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တော့ရဲတပ်ဖွဲ့ဝင်တွေကနေပြီးတော့မှဖမ်းဆီးလိုက်တဲ့ဒီ82ဦးစလုံးကိုခံဝင်ဖြင့်ပြင်ပြီးတော့မှလွှတ်ပေးခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ကျမတို့မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာဒီအမျိုးသမီးရှိနေတူဦးနေဖြစ်၎င်းကျမတို့ IBG မြန်မာရဲ့ဒီဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုရှိနေဖြစ်၎င်းအလုပ်လုပ်ကိုင်နေရတဲ့ဟာမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့တော့အထည်ပဲအများကြီးရှိပြီးတော့ဂုဏ်လည်းခုံယူရပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ IBG ဟာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့ဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုရှိနေရဲ့အခန်းကဏ္ဍအတွက်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်အချင်းချင်းကြီးဆက်ပြီးတော့လှုပ်ဆောင်နိုင်ရန်ပြီးတော့အသစ်သောຢာတွေကိုကြိုးပမ်းလှုပ်ဆောင်နိုင်ရန်ပြီးတော့တိုးချဲ့လှုပ်ဆောင်နိုင်ရန်ဒီအတွက်ကိုသင်တန်းပေးတာတွေပြီးတော့လမ်းညွှန်ပြသမှုတွေလည်းပဲရှိပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ဒီအရေးကြီးဆုံးအချိန်ကာလအမှောင်ကာလမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့ကျမအပါဝင်ဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုရှိနေတွေဟာနေလမျိုးစုံဖြင့်အန်ဒီတွေနဲ့ကြုံတွေ့ရတယ်ပြီးတော့ချိန်ချောက်မှုတွေလည်းပဲခံရပါတယ်ဒါဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့လက်တလောကာလမှာကြုံတွေ့နေရတဲ့ဒီဥပဒေပြုထောက်ကူပြုရဲ့ရှေ့နေတွေအတွက်ကတော့ကြီးမားဆုံးသောစိန်ခေါ်မှုတစ်ခုပင်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့လည်းပဲကျမအပါဝင်ဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုရှေ့နေတွေအားလုံးဒီလက်တလောကာလမှာဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုပေးခြင်းကိုရက်တန့်ခြင်းမရှိဘဲနဲ့အကူအညီလိုအပ်နေသူတွေအားလုံးအတွက်ကိုဆက်လက်ပြီးတော့မှဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုပေးလျက်ရှိကြပါတယ်ရှင်အခုကျမမျှဝေပေးသွားတာကတော့ကျမတို့ IBG မြန်မာကရဲ့ဒီဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုလုပ်ငန်းတွေအကြောင်းနဲ့လက်တလောကာလမှာဒီဥပဒေထောက်ကူပြုရှေ့နေတွေအနေနဲ့ကြုံတွေ့နေရတဲ့အခက်အခဲတွေသို့တော်လည်းပဲရှေ့နေတွေအနေနဲ့ဆက်လက်ပြီးတော့မှကူညီလှုပ်ဆောင်ပေးနေတဲ့အကြောင်းအရာလေးတွေကိုမျှဝေပေးသွားတာပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်ရှင်ဟုတ်ကဲ့ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်ရှင်
Hello, Chi.
Hello, Jimmy.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Wow, I've seen Bawen's remarks before, but just every time I do it, it's just so emotionally moving to me. Thank you. I thank your colleagues in Myanmar for the work that you're doing. First of all, we want to honor you for that. I'm struck, Sheena, and this is my own ignorance, so forgive me, but it's amazing to me that you and your colleagues with IBJ are able to have the impact you're having in the midst of this political military turmoil. And I guess I'm really kind of shocked because I keep asking myself, in the midst of the situation your country is in now, why would the governmental power be inclined or being motivated to honor the rule of law? I'm curious, like from your perspective, why are lawyers still able to do the work they're doing, even in the midst of the challenges that Darwin highlighted?
Yeah, Jimmy, thank you for the question. Yeah, you all know that we are facing this kind of political turmoil. So let me explain with also like the work of us. So it is kind of like extraordinary to see that our lawyers, like after like having like, so honestly, like the past 10 years, which is gilded with like democracy, maybe you can even call fake democracy, but even so, we have a good taste of democracy. What is it like? What is it like to live in a democratic nation? And we have tried to promote rule of law and access to justice. And IBJ has pioneered and invested in it since 2017. And it is extraordinary to see that today, in the very spring revolution, the very time we need support, the effort that we have invested has bloomed. Like you can see all the lawyers come up together, step forward to protect the people who are demanding the justice and democracy in the country peacefully. And so it kind of social movement like in our society, and like to the past 20 years. So a lot has changed in us, I guess. So this gave us courage to go on, to move on, like to keep going, to keep fighting.
Beautifully said, Chief. Thank you for that. This is a more personal question. I can't ask Darwin the question, but I'll ask you, Chi. And I was thinking about this question actually from when Muhammad, your colleague in Syria, spoke. How, on an internal emotional level, I mean, you're facing extraordinary challenges, the threat of detention and arrest, disappearance every single day, including Darwin. How do you maintain, as a community, working in Myanmar, as individuals? How do you maintain your wellness? How do you take care of yourself emotionally, given the obstacles you face, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes surmountable?
Yeah, so it is true that we all are facing like some amount of depression and stress, and like most of all furious. But we think that what kept us going is hope, because we all got nothing to lose. We all got nothing left to lose, but they got a lot to lose. So we have hope. Hope is the only thing that we are upholding.
Whew, beautiful. She got maybe cry up in here if you don't watch it. Thank you for that response. Thank you so much, Chi. so much more to explore with you and Jean-Claude and Mohammed. I do want to move on to your colleague Nadine, but in the larger group conversation, I'll have more questions for you and the others. Thank you so much, Chi. Next, we're going to be seeing a video done by Nadine, who's here with us, and then she'll be sharing a statement following the video screening.
Je suis Nadine Amoulifeza. Je réside à Bukavu, au sud Kivu, à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo. Je suis avocate au barreau du sud Kivu et travaille pour DRCBJ pour défendre les causes de nombreuses personnes vulnérables, à savoir les femmes et les enfants. En novembre 2020, en pleine situation de la pandémie à coronavirus, une jeune fille mineure âgée de 17 ans avait décidé de quitter le village pour descendre en ville afin de trouver de l'emploi pour faire survivre sa famille démunie. Arrivée en ville, cette jeune fille avait trouvé de l'emploi chez une dame pour faire le travail ménager. Quelques jours après, les autorités avaient décidé de la reprise de cours. La jeune fille s'était décidée de retourner au village pour poursuivre ses études. Après quelques jours, quand elle était en pleine classe, en plein cours, cette dernière avait reçu l'appel de son employeuse, sa patronne, lui disant de faire de son mieux pour descendre en ville d'urgence. Cette dernière avait décidé de descendre après les cours. Aussitôt arrivée chez sa patronne, cette dernière l'avait fait arrêter à la station de la police, comme quoi il lui a volé un téléphone. Elle y fait 4 jours sous torture et mauvais traitement de la part de la prétendue victime du vol, sans être envoyée, et cela sans être envoyée devant son juge naturel. Ce n'est qu'après l'intervention des DRCBJ qu'elle sera transférée devant le tribunal pour enfants. Après plaidoirie de la défense et comparution des témoins à décharge, le tribunal l'a reconnue innocente. L'enfant avait été libéré après 12 jours de privation de liberté. Cette jeune fille avait remercié DRCBJ car c'est grâce à DRCBJ qu'elle a recouvré sa liberté. Et là, elle avait pris la décision de retourner au village pour poursuivre ses études. Elle était vraiment contente, elle était vraiment reconnaissante à DRCBJ. Pour moi, IBJ demeure une maison de référence. IBJ m'a façonnée et a fait de moi une femme, non seulement pour compatir avec les autres femmes et enfants vulnérables, mais aussi en m'appropriant leur situation de vulnérabilité, en les assistant pro bono, et cela à toutes les phases de la procédure, à savoir la phase préjuridictionnelle et la phase juridictionnelle. Dans la profession d'avocat dans notre pays, la majorité sont des hommes. Il y a vraiment une minorité et elle est faite de femmes. Je profite de l'occasion pour encourager toutes ces femmes avocates qui se donnent corps et âme chaque jour pour assister les individus vulnérables en leur accordant une assistance pro bono et en faisant de leur situation leur propre situation. Merci.
Beautiful. Nadine has a statement which she'll be sharing with us with support of Linda Johnson. If Nadine, if she wants to read her, you can read her, she can read her statement now, and then Linda, you can translate for us.
Merci pour la parole m'accordée. Bonjour et bon après-midi à chacun selon la localisation. Je suis Nadine Amon-Lufeza. Je réside à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo, dans la région du Sud Kivu. La République démocratique du Congo est l'un des pays les plus politiquement instables au monde. Ces prisons dépassent habituellement leur capacité de 600% et 7 détenus sur 10 sont en détention provisoire dans l'attente de leur procès. Le travail d'IBJ dans le pays a commencé en 2016 lorsqu'il a ouvert un centre de ressources pour les défenseurs à Bukavu, dans la région du Sud Kivu, qui a pour activité la création de campagnes de sensibilisation aux droits, les visites des lieux de détention, la fourniture d'une aide juridique légale aux femmes vulnérables accusées, et enfin la formation d'avocats de la défense. Il y a un grand besoin d'accès à des avocats en République démocratique du Congo. Oui, un grand besoin. Bien que la torture soit criminalisée dans le pays, les personnes en détention provisoire sont toujours extrêmement vulnérables aux abus physiques, mentaux, sexuels, voire la torture. Comme un grand nombre de la population carcérale dans le pays est constituée de détenus provisoires, IBJ concentre tous ses efforts pour fournir une aide légale aux individus les plus pauvres pour payer les frais d'avocat. DRCBJ demeure une organisation particulière dans le pays, dans la région du Sud Kivu. Elle est l'unique qui dédie ses efforts à la protection des droits des accusés, tout particulièrement les accusés vulnérables. L'unique à former des avocats sur les compétences de la défense. L'unique organisation qui a un accès illimité à la prison centrale de Bukavu pour fournir une représentation légale aux individus indigents. L'unique à développer la culture des visites des lieux de détention grâce à son partenariat avec le parquet des grandes instances de Kavumu. L'unique organisation à mener des campagnes de sensibilisation sur les droits des accusés. Et en plus de toutes ces spécificités, nous avons contribué à mettre en place un réseau regroupant les femmes avocates de la région. Oui, un réseau où les femmes se disent « oui, nous pouvons ». Oui, ensemble, nous pouvons changer les choses. Quand nous l'avions commencé en 2020, nous étions à un nombre très minime. Nous étions au nombre de 3 avocates. Pour le moment, nous sommes au nombre de 17 avocates engagées dans les changements dans la représentation de femmes et filles accusées vulnérables. Au mois de mars dernier, le mois dédié aux droits des femmes, le réseau avait organisé une campagne d'aide légale aux femmes vulnérables détenues à la prison centrale de Bukavu. 19 femmes avaient bénéficié de l'aide légale et comme résultat, 7 d'elles avaient recouvré leur liberté. La joie manifestée par ces femmes était énorme. Oui, la joie était vraiment énorme, car grâce à nous, ces femmes ont eu à revivre le bonheur familial perdu à cause de leur détention. Aujourd'hui, grâce à son engagement, DRCBJ a déjà créé des partenariats stratégiques avec d'autres parties prenantes du secteur de la justice et nous envisageons étendre nos activités à d'autres régions de la province et à d'autres régions du pays. Car le besoin d'aide légale, le besoin d'accès à un avocat demeure une priorité pour tous les pays. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you so much, Nadine, for your remarks, and thank you, Linda. I believe my IBJ colleague Andrew noted in the chat that there is an English translation button that can be chosen for our French speakers in the conversation. Thank you again, Nadine, and thank you, Linda. Finally, it's my pleasure to have our friend and colleague Christmas talk about his work in Zimbabwe, the challenges that they're facing there. Thank you, Christmas.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Tafaza Christmas. I'm a Zimbabwean lawyer currently working with International Bridges to Justice, Zimbabwe. Today, I want to share with you the story of thousands of Zimbabweans who are usually counted, but they're never named. The Zimbabweans who constitute 90% of the population currently working in the informal sector, with 22,000 Zimbabweans currently being held without trial in various pre-trial detention centers across the country. The 100,000 Zimbabweans arrested between March and July 2020 for allegedly violating COVID-19 related laws and regulations. These are the Zimbabweans you find as figures and numbers in various reports, but their stories are never told. And these are the Zimbabweans which are represented by the National Bridges to Justice in Zimbabwe. The National Bridges to Justice Zimbabwe, IBJ Zimbabwe, was established in 2008 with the primary purpose of ensuring that all citizens have early access to a lawyer whenever they find themselves in conflict with the law. And to date, IBJ Zimbabwe remains the founding as well as the primary organization that is really geared towards ensuring that every citizen has access to a criminal law defense lawyer when they would otherwise not be able to afford one. I remember at one point I was having a conversation with a friend of mine and I was telling him about the kind of work that we do as IBJ in Zimbabwe. And he asked me a question. The question he asked me was quite interesting. The question he asked me was, so you're telling me that IBJ represents criminals? To which I confidently responded and said, yes. But in turn, I also asked him a question. The question I asked him was, is my Tadiwa a criminal? Tadiwa is a very common name in my country, and my simply means mother. So what I was asking him was, is Tadiwa's mother a criminal? To which he looked at me, looking very much puzzled and said, I don't know anyone by that name. And I explained to him, I said, my Tadiwa is the woman who wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning to go to the vegetable market in a place called Mbare to buy vegetables for resale. My Tadiwa is the woman who sets up a vending store next to the big and flashy supermarkets so that she can also take advantage of the people going in and out of the supermarket and sell her wares. She's the woman who goes into the city in the evening and puts her produce down next to the pavement in the streets to try and take advantage of the people that are rushing home out of the town, out of the city center. Is this woman a criminal? My friend clearly responded and said, no, this woman is not a criminal at all. She's just trying to eke out a living. To which I responded and told him to say, in terms of the laws that were set up in January, for instance, to do with COVID-19, this woman is a criminal. First of all, by leaving her house at 4 a.m., she has broken the COVID-19 regulations that impose the curfew that barred people from moving between the hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And by setting up a vending store next to a supermarket, she has violated so many municipal laws that bar people from selling in these so-called undesignated areas. And by setting up a produce next to the pavement, she is liable for prosecution for the offense of loitering, for obstructing the path of people moving. So she is a criminal in terms of the law. This woman is arrested. She's taken to a police station and she's left alone in the company of mostly male police officers. She's vulnerable to torture. She's vulnerable to abuse. She's vulnerable to all sorts of inhuman and degrading treatment. She's vulnerable to sextortion. She can barely afford to pay the fine because she was just trying to make a living, trying to at least put one meal a day before their family. These are the kind of people that we represent as the National Bridges to Justice in Zimbabwe. To ensure that a lawyer is by her side, to ensure at least that we can see that her rights are not violated, to facilitate the early release from custody. Otherwise, she'll be taken and she'll be thrown into the police cells, the overcrowded police cells, where she's further put at risk of being infected with COVID-19, the very COVID-19 which the state is trying to prevent people from getting. My Tadiwa's story is not an exception. In a country where we have almost 40% of the people living under the poverty datum line, Maitadiwa and several thousand other Zimbabweans are surviving through vending, walking, begging, selling, all these different activities. And by criminalizing life sustenance activities, we are essentially criminalizing poverty. As IBJ, we have tried to do our part. We have a small team of lawyers which we have deployed to different police stations to try and facilitate the early release of people who have been arrested for such offenses. But it's clear that our efforts compared to the work that lies before us, we are only doing very, very little because the pandemic is not yet over. It is still very much with us. And our government has come out outrightly and said that it will prioritize lives before livelihoods. I know it has a nice ring to it, but for people like Maitadiwa, the question they will ask the government is, how can you separate our livelihoods from our lives? How can you preserve our lives when you're not preserving our livelihoods? Without any savings, without any social grants, Zimbabweans like Maitadiwa who survive every day by going into the streets to sell their wares are left very much vulnerable. As IBJ Zimbabwe, what we've tried to do so far is to go to a few police stations that we can manage with our small team of lawyers. But there's still need for us to train and recruit more lawyers so that they are also cognizant of these Zimbabweans who are usually forgotten, these Zimbabweans who are usually subsumed under statistics, so that we can try and also advocate the government of Zimbabwe for it to bring about some form of positive policy change, as well as behavioral change in the way that our law enforcement agents conduct themselves. With your support, I'm sure as IBJ Zimbabwe will be able to go far and do more for the people who are in dire need of our help. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Christmas. That was very rich with information and insight. So appreciate your remarks. Just a couple of questions before we go to the larger conversation. It seems to me, based on what you shared with us, that a big responsibility that you have is around narrative, and by that I mean, given the, as you've noted, given the complicated political history of Zimbabwe over the past decades, I imagine there has been a profound erosion of trust and legal mechanisms in the law itself. And I'm just curious, Christmas, in your capacity, I know that you're IBJ's UN liaison and advocacy officer, and congratulations on getting your PhD, working on your PhD at the University of Geneva. I imagine a lot of what you're doing is also narrative change, building trust in the community, building trust among everyday people, especially poor people, that the law is meant to serve them. And I was hoping you could share some insight into how you're creating narrative change in Zimbabwe in regards to the law.
I think that's a very good question. At the foundation of any form of trust is interaction or communication between the government and the citizens. Currently, if you talk to different Zimbabweans, you realize that there are different types of Zimbabweans living in the same country. There are some Zimbabweans who don't even know about the plight of people, like Maitadiwa, which I've given. And it's also possible that we have some government officials who are actually blind to what is going on in these high-density suburbs, where people are surviving from hand to mouth every day, and people who are unable to work from home. So that is the starting point, is for us to try and create platforms for dialogue. And as IBJ, we have round tables where we bring together lawyers, we bring together policymakers, governments, as well as different civil society NGOs who represent citizens, for us to have dialogue around the issues that concern people in their communities. This is the starting point for us to be able to foster civic trust. from then on, it is possible for us to be able to have policies that are responsive to the needs of people, policies that are also cognizant of the people who are numbered and who are never named, these people who are usually left out and discarded when government comes up with different policies. So I would say at the root, the fundamental issue that we need to address is to create lines of communication that allow the policymakers, the implementers to be able to interact with ordinary citizens who are affected and have to live with these policies on a daily basis.
I appreciate your response, Christmas. Thank you so much for that. I know we have more questions in the chat for you and your colleagues from IBJ. So I want to make sure those questions are percolated in our conversation. First, though, I would like to go to a special guest from Los Angeles, Mia Yamamoto, who's going to be sharing her insight as a longtime civil rights advocate and defense attorney working in an array of issues, both within the Asian American Pacific Islander community, but also within the LGBTQI plus communities as well. Thank you, Mia, for joining us.
Thank you for the introduction. I just want to say, Jimmy, appreciate all the help with this and your moderating. I just want to say I'm so honored to be among you, listening to the stories from all these places, ministering to the vulnerable and to the poor while dodging bombs and snipers and improvised explosive devices. Myanmar, your colleagues, your friends, the best people among you are being arrested. Some of them are being killed. To have to try to practice the kind of work that we do among the poor, among the people, at a time like this in all these countries is so challenging. We know we've had that history with Burundi has been in struggle for so long. Jean-Claude, I salute you for staying with it. This whole struggle that's going on right now and this whole theme is always directed at the poor, the most marginalized, the most targeted, and the most, absolutely the most oppressed among us. And so I come to you echoing this theme from Los Angeles, California. I'm an activist with a number of different organizations, including Black Lives Matter. We first started our local chapter about 5 years ago, and we've watched it blossom. I represent them in court. I march with them. We have been a part of a movement, a long-time movement in this country called the Civil Rights Movement. And it has always been the struggle for Black liberation that has reached out and helped the women's movement, every single minority movement in this country, including the movements for LGBT liberation. So we carry that on because we believe that my father and all the other people that were a part of this movement for so many years would be in the vanguard of Black Lives Matter. They would be marching with us, they would be protesting with us, they would be rallying with us, because this issue of racism, bigotry, and anti-Blackness doesn't just infect this country. It is a worldwide problem. It is a worldwide issue. Black Lives Matter has exposed what are the evils of colonialism and imperialism, and dare I say it, capitalism, that oppress and subjugates those, that is a predatory system. Start looking at who is being oppressed. And if you look at this country, there's no question but that it is Black and brown people in this country. So this movement matters greatly here. It is a moment when we have seized the public profile. Now what do we do with it? It needs to be more than just a group of people fighting against an oppressive system. I call upon all my brothers and sisters everywhere, not just people of color, but white people, my white brothers and sisters too, to fight against white supremacy and white nationalism and any movement, political movements as well, that oppress people of color. I come from a community. I am a transgender woman of color. I am a targeted individual. My collective group is one that is decimated by bigotry and by hatred, by the kinds of issues that are raised by those who support the kinds of status quo that oppresses others, that continues to place people in a disadvantage economically, socially, and judicially. We work within a system And I salute my brothers and sisters who are mentioning pro bono. Pro bono work is where this begins. The good hearts of people, the consciences of the people is where it begins. We can recruit, we can get people to come, because any minority movement, and this is true here as well as anywhere, cannot succeed without the support of allies. The allies have to be persuaded, have to be educated as to the justice in our cause. They have to stand with us. They have to vote with us. They have to march with us and maybe go to jail with us, because justice requires the people of conscience to come together and work towards the poor. We talk about the criminalization of poverty. It's impossible to look at that without looking at the intersections of poverty. It intersects with race. It intersects with class. It intersects with LGBT issues. Start looking at seeing who's in charge, look at who's being charged, and look at the inequality of this system that's being perpetuated by certain political movements, both in this country and abroad. There are right-wing movements that want to exclude transgender people from the mainstream of American life. In every country in the world, there is discrimination against transgender people. But in this country, Black transgender women are a target of the bigots, the primary target of every hate crime in this country. So let's talk about anti-Blackness, because it infects every single country in the world. And I'm saying this too because I know that Africa has a history of imperialism and colonialism. And it comes from the same things that are coming out of the empires that are falling away because we need them to fall away, because democracy demands it. And I stand with my brothers and sisters in Myanmar. I love you. I am with you every step of the way, just like with Elam, dodging the tyranny above you and trying to be a public defender. I always say to people, every single place I go, that being a public defender is the highest calling for any lawyer, any place. Working for the poor is the highest calling for any professional, any place. Doing your work with compassion and care and love and commitment is the greatest way for a person to live. And I salute all of you. I am so proud to be among you. I am so proud to be a part of IBJ. I'm so proud to be a founding member. I can tell you about how much I love this organization, and I love your executive director because she inspires me every day. All of you, I'm looking around this panel here, and I just want to tell you how much you matter to me. And I want to say this, just our advocacy for the poor uplifts every single one of us. Our work is sacred every step of the way. And I say this, even though I'm an atheist, I'm not a real believer that way, but you have all given me spirituality. This organization has made me realize that this is not just service, it's spirit too. You know, it's like this. In my country, there was a great Supreme Court justice, and his name was Thurgood Marshall. And his mentor was a man named Charles Hamilton Houston. And he always said the same thing, that any lawyer who is not a social engineer is a parasite on society. Look around your communities and look around your profession and see who is making things better, and everybody else is making it worse. Because if they're just exploiting the systems, they are predators too. We have to organize against the system that oppresses the people that we care about. It can't just be done case at a time. We have to advocate on a policy level. We need to support IBJ's efforts in this regard. And I tell you, I bring this report from Los Angeles, and these efforts matter. These efforts matter in the streets, at the ballot box, and in the courts. And I salute every single one of you. And if I just call it together, I want to thank every single one of you just for this opportunity to be among you and to be inspired from you and to hear your stories here at 5 o'clock in the morning here in Los Angeles. It matters to me. It uplifts me. It re-energizes me. I always know that I've got to continue with this work, no matter how old I get, no matter how tired I get, because it matters. There are people out there who need our help. And as long as they need our help, we have to continue with what we do. And we have to continue in the spirit that's been there since the very beginning. I salute all my brothers and sisters, all my public defender brothers and sisters, all my pro bono brothers and sisters. I tell the students over here that what you do for money will support you. That what you do for free will define you. And by the way, you know, I do love some prosecutors and judges, not many, but I always tell these kids that come up to me, because I talk to students all the time, And they come to me and they say, oh, we want to study criminal law because we want to be prosecutors. And I always tell them the same thing. I said, you should have higher aspirations for your life than that. If you want to just settle for the status quo and defending the government at every stretch, you're going to have a long gray life and you'll be really secure. But will you ever make a difference in the world? I don't know. I think you need to do it from where we are. You need to join IBJ. You need to support IBJ. You need to get into these countries and fight for liberty and fight for the principles that we all believe in, because human rights, they're universal. This is worldwide. Poverty is inequality is worldwide. These issues will not be stamped out just because you've done something good in your own little municipality. That which we do for our own little minority, for our own little community, our own little nation, matters nothing if it does not benefit everybody. So I understand where we are going, what we need to do. I've learned so much today. I thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you for being there on the streets. Thank you for continuing. I'm with you all the way. Black Lives Matter. I hear all this stuff about all lives matter. All lives will not matter until Black Lives Matter. Thank you very much.
Wow, man! Thank you for bringing the fire to the conversation. That I don't know if we needed more, but thank you for that. For making it plain for all of us. You know, I so appreciate the passion and the truth you're bringing just now personally. I think if nothing else, you know, this conversation thus far has shown all of us, both in the audience and dialogue with each other, just how much we're connected, our efforts respectively across the world. And we have to rise up together and lift each other up together. I want to elevate some of the questions in the chat from my colleagues here in the session. I'll curate them and share them out. One of the questions I think is more directed to Chi. It's from Lemium, who asks, is the justice system in Myanmar independent from the government and military?
Thank you, Jimmy, and thank you for asking the question. So in Myanmar, judiciary has never been independent enough before the coup, and after the coup, since the day one, the judiciary has the junta has like control over the entire judiciary, including the government legal aid agency. However, so here it is also amazed like to see that the work that IBJ and all other like legal aid providers and pro bonos, all we have done for the legal aid and access to justice through the advocacy work with the district actors, district officials, has like, it is amazed to see that the young judges and prosecutors, they are defying the injustice, even though the entire judiciary is under control. And like, for example, like there was a prosecutor who contacted us to help a protester to get a lawyer. There was a judge who refused like to issue warrant of arrest against 45 lawyers, including an IBJ lawyer. And there was a judge who was arrested because he refused to give remand order against the protesters. So these are extraordinary stories that we can like see over the years that our efforts have been paid off very well. And the seeds like of like the love for the rule of law and access to justice, the love for the people, humanity, has grown among us, and which I believe will keep us going in this fight. So no, judiciary is not independent.
Thank you so much for that response, Chi. Cecilia from the Philippines asks, Karen and everyone in the conversation, how do we best address, globally, what's our responsibility and opportunity to address attacks against human rights defenders working in their respective countries? And whoever wants to take that question, please jump in.
I'll jump in. You know, International Bridges of Justice really is looking at the protection of a lawyer for every single person. And what we've seen through our work in the last 20 years is by focusing on that, especially in times of crisis, you know, we're prepared. We're prepared. We don't specifically defend political prisoners or defenders who are being targeted, but this is part of the overall challenge. If someone's picked up and they're arrested, then you're gonna need the protection of a lawyer. And that's where, you know, we really gear up in times of peace so that even in times of conflict and in times of challenge, we're ready.
Great, thank you for that response, Karen. Another question, and then this is from Dudney from Congo, who's asking. I'm going to try to summarize his question and reflection. He's asking about the issue of torture and what mechanisms can be created to protect both you know, the lawyer, a lawyer, and victims of crimes from torture or abuse. And I'm not sure. I'd love to hear, if possible, from Jean-Claude or Nadine on this question.
Thank you so much for this question. First of all, torture is a phenomenon that is happening illegally, and perpetrators sometimes, I'm just talking on the side or on the situation of the ground. They try to hide, avoid evidences, to hide the truth to even the wide the public, and protection here comes, for example, in our daily work, start by this official recognition of the work, create a constructive dialogue with authorities, bring them before the facts, and bring them to adopt a solution, either to protect both lawyers and victim. Unfortunately, for my experience on what I have seen here on the ground, cases of torture, cases that are brought to court from of torture are not getting a rapid response, and sometimes they are not getting a favorable solution at all. This is because on one side, there are cases that are come to tarnish the image of the country, the image of actors, government actors, and it is on this side where there is this tentative of hiding the truth. But in the laws, there is this protection, and we need to sensitize both authorities, sensitize both actors, lawyers, so that you know how to behave in this situation, and also use other mechanisms, state and non-state mechanism, national independent bodies mechanism, human rights commissions mechanism, as well as international mechanism where possible to try to fight against these these problems of torture.
I might have to go to Christmas next.
No, I found when I was reading the comment by the donor in the chat, I found it quite interesting. The way I understood it is, even though legally when we define torture, it is an act by public officials, but the act of torture itself in most contexts is usually a private phenomenon. They really try to make it a very secretive act. They don't want people to know that people are being tortured. So one of the solutions to actually addressing torture is just to make it public. By that we mean, first of all, ensuring that if there's early access to a lawyer is there, and you're able to track the well-being of your client to be able to tell what happened to the client. But it also means roping in other stakeholders like the media, working with the media. Let's work with all the outlets that we have in society to make it public, because it's always interesting. I remember at some point when you interact with law enforcement officials, none of them will come out openly and say, yes, we torture people. So they know that this is not a good practice, but they do it secretly. And it's in my view, the reason why torture continues to exist and continues to be perpetuated is because we've allowed this conspiracy of silence to continue in these detention facilities, in these prisons, when no one is able to open that veil to be able to see what is going on in these police cells, what is going on in these prisons. So I think as lawyers, we have this advantage or this privilege of being able to access these places by right of law. So by doing that, we should be able to amplify what is going on, tell the stories of the people that are in detention. Let's amplify the stories so that people know exactly what is happening in these closed spaces. I think it's one of the ways that we can actually address and work towards eradicating torture.
Thank you for that insight, Christmas, and thank you for your response as well, Jean-Claude. We're in our final minute here, and I just wanted to say, before transitioning to Karen to close us out, it's really been an honor and pleasure hearing from you, each of you, getting to know your work. Linda, thank you so much for your translation support. Sanji and Andrew, thank you so much for your preparation and back-end support. Thank you, Yenica and Sophie, for your support with this session. Karen, Mia, Jean-Claude, Ilham, who's not here, Mohammed, Darwin, Chi, Christmas, Nadine, we're keeping you in our thoughts and hearts. Please know that we see you, we hear you, and speaking for myself on behalf of the Skoll Foundation, we'll do what we can to support you and your work as much as possible. Karen, thank you so much for inviting me to moderate this session. It's been my honor, and I look forward to working with you in the future. I'll pass the microphone to you.
Jimmy, thank you so much for just everything, for your moderation. Thank you to the Skoll Foundation for allowing us to be here. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I also join Mia in saluting all the defenders, everyone working with Bridges of Justice. And the last thing is that I was remembering that with the George Floyd murder, when we came together with the global call, Mohammed flashed and shared a picture with the global international Bridges of Justice in the rubble, an artistic, beautiful graffiti of George Floyd. And the lawyers stood up and they said, you know what? We want you to know that we stand with you. We stand with all oppressed everywhere. And in that message also is, we stand with you and please stand together with us. And I think that's just how we feel today, that we are all standing together and we are going to attack this injustice together, because as we know, it's ripe. The time is ripe for justice. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here as we create this together.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.